Welcome to the debate. If you look at a perfectly balanced spinning top when it is moving at its absolute maximum velocity, there's this really distinct optical illusion that occurs.
Oh, right.
Yeah, to the naked eye, the edges just blur, the axis locks perfectly vertical, and it actually appears as though the object is entirely perfectly still.
It is an eerie phenomenon, honestly, because your mind registers this absolute motionless quietude. But if you were to, reach out and touch that top, the friction would instantly burn your finger.
Exactly.
It is absolutely packed with violent kinetic energy. It's a total stillness masking total exertion.
Right, and that exact paradox is what we confront when we step into ancient philosophies of the mind, specifically when we look at how human beings are supposed to achieve true, lasting inner peace in just a chaotic world.
Yeah,
Are we supposed to stop moving completely? Or are we supposed to spin so perfectly, so effortlessly, that the friction of our actions simply disappears? Today, we are exploring a really profound tension found within Chapter 6 of the Bhagavad Gita.
the chapter known as Dhyana Yoga, right? The yoga of meditation.
Yes, and we are focusing intensely on just two verses, Shlokas 6.2 and 6.3. These verses basically attempt to bridge this massive gap between active, demanding work in the material world and deep, internal serenity.
Which is a critical juncture in the text. I mean, it's perhaps one of the most important transitions in Eastern philosophy.
Oh, absolutely.
It is the moment where the framework moves from the path of selfless action into the absolute contemplative mastery of the mind. And the tension is very real. It asks this fundamental question about what it actually means to be a realized, enlightened person. Does action prevent peace or, does action create it?
Which brings us to the central question of our discussion today. Does this text propose that the ultimate state of yoga is achieved through a permanent cognitive reframing of our actions, meaning we continue to work vigorously in the world just without the anxiety of expectation?
Right.
Or does it outline a progressive, linear path where active work is merely a stepping stone, like a temporary ladder that must eventually be left behind for the actual literal cessation of material action?
That is the core of it.
Yeah, so I will be arguing that true renunciation, as defined in these verses, is entirely an internal cognitive shift. I believe it is a mastery of the mind that allows us to maintain active, rigorous engagement in society without being damaged by it.
And I will be taking the opposing view. I will argue that the text is remarkably precise in its language, and it explicitly reserves the cessation of material action as the ultimate final state for the attained yogi. Action has a vital, undeniable place in human development, sure, but it is a vehicle. It is not the final destination.
Okay, to begin, we really need to look at what Shloka 6.2 actually does to the historical understanding of renunciation.
Right, because it shifts it completely.
It radically redefines it. Historically, the concept of sannyasa, renunciation, it conjured this image of abandoning your career, leaving your family, giving away your possessions, and moving to a cave in the mountains to meditate in silence.
The classic hermit trope.
Exactly. But this verse tears that down. It explicitly states that what is called sannyasa is the exact same thing as yoga. It says no one becomes a yogi without giving up sankalpa.
Sankalpa. That's the crucial word.
It is the key here. It translates to our obsessive mental planning, our expectations, our relentless anxiety over outcomes. The text identifies the real enemy, and the enemy is not the physical action of working or building or providing.
No, it's the expectation trap.
Precisely. Therefore, the highest ideal presented here is decoupled action. You work with 100% dedication, but you completely drop the calculation of what reward comes next. You don't renounce the world, you just renounce the mental clutter.
I mean, I agree entirely with the definition of the expectation trap. Dropping that obsessive outcome anxiety is absolutely a requirement.
Right.
But stopping the analysis at verse 6.2 completely ignores the stark, unavoidable progression outlined in the very next breath.
How so?
Well, Shloka 6.3 divides spiritual seekers into two distinct categories. First, you have the Ararukshu.
The climber.
Yes, the climber. the one who wishes to ascend the ladder of yoga. Second, you have the yoga Ruda, the one who has attained the peak.
Okay.
The text explicitly states that for the climber, selfless action is the required means, but for the one who has attained the summit, shama, which translates directly to serenity and the literal cessation of material action, is the means.
But see, I think...
Wait, just to finish this point, you cannot collapse these two distinct states into one comfortable modern paradigm. Active work in the world is definitively a preparatory phase. It is the ladder.
Right, but...
Once you reach the roof, you do not keep carrying the ladder on your back. You step off into stillness.
But if we take shama to mean stepping off the ladder into literal physical non-action, we completely undermine the radical redefinition that just happened in the previous verse.
I don't see it that way.
Well, let's look at what cognitive decoupling actually looks like in practice, because I think it explains how stillness and intense action can coexist.
Okay, give me an example.
Think of a master surgeon in the middle of a complex 12-hour trauma operation.
Sure.
When that surgeon is at the absolute peak of their craft, standing over the table, they are not thinking about their hospital salary.
No, of course not.
They are not thinking about the prestige of saving the patient or the fear of a malpractice lawsuit. They have completely renounced the expectation of the fruit. The self of the surgeon essentially vanishes into the precision of the scalpel, its total presence.
Right.
Now, does their physical action diminish because they stopped obsessing over the outcome? No, it actually reaches a state of absolute perfection. The identity is decoupled from the result, but the action is intense and vital.
Yeah, but...
That is what this text is describing. It is not about putting the scalpel down forever. It is about changing the psychological state of the person holding it.
I come at it from a different way. Your surgeon analogy, it captures the climber perfectly.
The climber?
Yes, that is exactly how one ought to act while they are ascending the ladder, with total dedication, absolute presence, and zero attachment to the ego's rewards.
Right, which sounds like mastery.
But it completely ignores the sage. If the ultimate goal of human consciousness is simply to become a highly effective, anxiety-free worker, if it's just about being a better surgeon or a better architect, then there would be no distinction between the climber and the attained.
Well, the distinction is the internal state.
But the text wouldn't need to introduce the concept of shama, of cessation, at the peak. To use your analogy, Shloka 6.3 is asking what happens when the operation is over, the hospital is quiet, and the surgeon realizes that the relentless drive to manipulate the material world was itself just a phase of development.
I think that's a stretch.
The attained yogi doesn't just hold the scalpel with a clearer mind. They eventually transcend the need to operate entirely. They enter a state of consciousness where interacting with the material world is no longer required for their spiritual completeness.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. If we assume the attained sage literally stops participating in material action, aren't we right back to the trope of the hermit in the cave?
Not necessarily.
But that's the very trope Shloka 6.2 refuted. I argue that the mechanism of achieving this stillness is entirely internal. It is about how action purifies the mind.
Okay, walk me through that.
When you engage in mindful, selfless action over a long period of time, it purifies your focus. Once that focus is pure, inner stillness, the cessation of the churning mind follows naturally.
Right, the mind stops churning.
Exactly. What ceases is not the physical movement of the hands or feet. What ceases is the frantic, selfish drive behind them. The body continues to serve society, but the internal state is one of absolute quiet.
We have to maintain definitional precision here, because redefining cessation to simply mean a quiet mind while working softens the philosophy to fit up, well, a modern comfort level.
I'm not softening it, I'm making it practical.
But the text contrasts action directly against non-action. Let's talk about the mechanism you brought up, though, because the text's understanding of human psychology is incredibly precise.
It really is.
You cannot just command an anxious, ego-driven person to sit still and experience absolute peace. If a deeply restless person goes to a silent retreat in a cave, they don't find peace.
No, they just take their loud, anxious mind into the cave with them.
Exactly. Therefore, you must exhaust that kinetic mental energy. And how do you do that? Through action.
Right. By doing the work.
Yes, but specifically through selfless work. When an ordinary person works, they operate on a neurological reward loop. Will I get promoted? Will people praise me? Will I fail?
Which is exhausting.
That anxiety creates immense mental friction. It generates kinetic energy. When you act solely for the sake of the action without tying your ego to the outcome, you stop feeding that dopamine loop of desire and fear.
So we agree.
Partially. Over time, the psychological friction of desire simply starves to death. It runs out of fuel. That is the mechanism of purification. But eventually, that kinetic energy is completely exhausted.
And then what?
The work does its job. The ladder is climbed. And when you reach that peak, material action falls away because it is no longer necessary as a vehicle for purification. The ego is starved, and true contemplative serenity begins.
I know what people listening are thinking right now.
Oh?
Yeah, they are thinking starving the ego and achieving total cessation of action sounds incredibly poetic, but I have a mortgage. I have children to feed. I have a team of employees who rely on me. Sure, the reality of everyday life.
Right. How does a philosophy that points toward the ultimate cessation of action survive contact with the real world? If the ultimate goal requires stepping entirely out of the world of action, then this yoga is only truly accessible to monks and ascetics.
Not at all.
I think it is.
The brilliance of bridging these two verses is that it gives a roadmap for the householder. It says your daily duties, paying your mortgage, raising your kids, are not distractions from your spiritual path. They are the path itself.
The text is deeply compassionate, and it absolutely acknowledges the reality of the householder. It doesn't tell the person with a mortgage to abandon their family and default on their loans.
Thank goodness for that.
It says use the paying of the mortgage, use the raising of the children as the very tools to exhaust your ego. You perform those duties with absolute love and zero selfish attachment.
Right. Which is active.
Yes, but we must not confuse the compassion of the text with a lowering of its ultimate standard. Just because most of us are climbers navigating our careers and families doesn't mean we should lower the peak of the mountain to meet us where we currently stand.
I'm not lowering the peak,
Acknowledging that we are in the active phase doesn't diminish the value of our lives, but we shouldn't confuse the medicine for the ultimate state of health.
The medicine?
Action is the medicine for a restless mind. Total cessation, or shama, is the state of a perfectly healthy, quiet mind.
I want to push back on the idea that maintaining an active life is somehow a lesser state of health, especially when we look at how this philosophy applies to the modern crisis of burnout.
Okay, let's talk about burnout.
Right now, we live in a hyper-competitive, deeply exhausted culture. And what is the prevailing advice for burnout? Just sit still.
Right.
We are told to download a meditation app, sit on a cushion for 20 minutes, and clear our minds. And what happens?
You end up making grocery lists in your head.
Exactly. We force a frantic mind into a quiet room, and it immediately starts racing with project deadlines. It leads to immense frustration and feelings of failure.
True.
The brilliance of this specific text is that it offers an actionable, psychological alternative. It says, if you are struggling with that frantic energy, don't force the stillness. Turn your daily tasks, drafting a report, cleaning your kitchen, helping a neighbor, into the meditation itself through absolute decoupled presence.
Yeah.
You cure the burnout not by stopping the work, but by changing your cognitive relationship to the work.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered that viewing this purely as a way to improve performance or cure workplace burnout reduces profound spiritual philosophy to a productivity hack?
I wouldn't call fundamentally healing someone's relationship to their daily life a productivity hack. I'm talking about achieving deep psychological alignment in the real world.
But look at how modern corporate culture weaponizes mindfulness.
Oh, sure.
Companies bring in meditation coaches and teach decoupled action so that their employees can work 80-hour weeks without suffering a mental breakdown. They use the mechanics of Eastern philosophy to optimize the ego's pursuit of material gain.
Well, that's a perversion of it, obviously.
Exactly. They want you to be a more efficient, less stressed worker bee. The Bhagavad Gita is not a manual for becoming a highly effective middle manager. It is a manual for ultimate spiritual liberation.
I agree with that.
Corporate mindfulness uses these techniques to help you serve the material world better. The Gita prescribes mindful action to extinguish your attachment to the material world entirely. We have to acknowledge that massive distinction. The action plan for the beginner is indeed mindful work, but it asks the true seeker to eventually transcend material ambition altogether.
I don't know if you can separate the two at the very end.
You are creating a false dichotomy by suggesting that spiritual liberation requires the complete cessation of physical contribution to the world.
How so?
If I am building a house for someone who needs shelter, and I have zero desire for praise, zero desire for financial reward, and zero attachment to how my craftsmanship is perceived, my material ambition is completely extinguished.
Okay.
I have achieved that inner cessation who we're talking about. The desire loop is completely starved, but I am still swinging the hammer. The spinning top is perfectly still on its axis, but it is still interacting with the ground. To say I must put down the hammer to be truly realized seems to limit the scope of what enlightenment can look like in practice.
And I argue that you are softening the linguistic boundary the text purposefully draws between action and cessation.
Linguistic boundary?
Yes. If swinging the hammer without desire was the ultimate state of human existence, the text would simply say, for the climber, selfless action is the means, and for the attained perfect, selfless action is the means.
Right, but it uses different words.
It doesn't just use different words, it shifts the vocabulary entirely. It introduces shama, quietude, rest.
Which I still say is internal.
There is a deeply rooted understanding in this tradition that there exists a state of being where the external world, with all its hammers, houses, and hospitals, is no longer the domain of the sage. The sage's domain becomes pure, infinite consciousness.
So the top falls over?
No, the kinetic energy we talked about with the spinning top. Eventually, the friction stops, the spinning stops. And what remains is not an illusion of stillness created by blinding speed, but actual, profound, motionless peace.
You know, this actually brings us to a fascinating point of convergence, despite our different views on the summit itself.
Okay, where do we converge?
Regardless of whether we view the ultimate state as perfected, expectation-free action, or as the literal cessation of physical interaction with the world, the psychological insight regarding the journey itself is identical.
I can agree with that.
The text recognizes something that modern neuroscience and psychology are only just now empirically mapping. You cannot force a restless system into sudden rest. The kinetic energy of our desires, our fears, and our ambitions must be constructively channeled and exhausted.
Absolutely. The philosophical pragmatism here is unmatched. It understands that telling an anxious human being to simply stop thinking is not just unhelpful, it is entirely contrary to human nature.
Exactly.
The energy must go somewhere. The genius of Shloka 6.3 is the prescription of selfless action as the specific mechanism to exhaust that energy. You take the focus off your own ego, you pour your entirety into the work itself, and through that systematic starvation of the selfish motive, true clarity arises. We agree completely on the mechanics of the climb. You cannot bypass the ladder.
We do. Our divergence lies purely in what we find when we run out of rungs on that ladder.
Right.
As we look at these two powerful verses, my position remains that the text fundamentally elevates human action by redefining renunciation. By equating true renunciation with the practice of yoga, it proves that dropping the expectation trap, working with absolute dedication while remaining completely free from the anxiety of outcomes, is the ultimate mastery of the mind.
And my position.
Just to finish, it allows the spiritual seeker to remain a vital, active, and compassionate contributor to the world, operating from a place of unshakable inner stillness. You become the perfectly balanced top.
And my position remains that we must honor the clear, progressive framework the text lays out without diluting it to fit our modern obsession with productivity.
I still don't think it's dilution.
While action is indeed the necessary, beautiful vehicle for the restless mind to achieve clarity and exhaust its worldly desires, the text definitively points toward a reality beyond action. For those who reach the spiritual summit, the absolute cessation of material engagement is the defining characteristic of ultimate tranquility. Action is the ladder, but true liberation requires stepping off that ladder into a state of pure, undisturbed serenity.
It is an incredible tension to navigate. We are all trying to balance our demanding, hyperactive duties in this world with a very deep, fundamental craving for peace.
It's the human condition.
It really is. The challenge of integrating these teachings requires a constant, honest examination of our own motives. And the text itself doesn't stop here. The journey of the mind continues to unfold in the subsequent verses, exploring exactly how that focus is maintained.
There is definitely so much more to explore.
It leaves us with that lingering image we started with. As you navigate the intense friction of your daily life, your career, and your obligations, are you still trying to forcefully stop the top from spinning? Or are you learning to spin so perfectly that the friction disappears entirely? And ultimately, are you currently climbing the ladder of action, or are you ready to seek the absolute peak of stillness?